Hello, listeners. This is Zorinka, and you are listening to Breakfast with the Banker.
All right. It is a fabulous day, my friends. Welcome to episode number 4 and the first episode of 2024. Happy New Year. Today I have my longtime friend and external colleague, let's call him, Dayle West. Dayle West has many talents, and if I listed them all, we would use up the entire 30 minutes just talking about the wonderful things that he's done. So I'll let him give you the 2-second spiel about him, and then we'll jump into what we're going to talk about today, which is cash flow. Dun, dun, dun. Hi, Dayle.
Hi, Zorinka. Thank you very much, and happy 2024.
Woo-hoo.
Just a little bit about me. I've worked in the financial services industry for over 30-some years, had almost every type of role you could imagine, from the retail side, through managing branches, through corporate, commercial, wealth management. So I've had a chance to do most everything out there, which has brought us to today.
And I'm so glad you're here because your wealth of knowledge is like the supernova of all resources in banking. I always tell the people I run into that I might know someone who knows someone. And when I say that, I mean, I know Dayle who might know someone who could help you. So thank you for being here. And thank you for talking to us about one of the most important things in, I think, business, and that's cash flow management. So I guess we'll just start at the beginning as to why this is today's topic and why it's so important. So what do you think, Dayle? Why is cash flow so important? And maybe even let's talk about what it even is.
Well, I was reading something last night in preparation for today. It was on cash flow, and I was looking for the source, but I do know it's fairly accurate, is that the majority of businesses that have financial problems or go out of business, over 80% of it's due to cash flow mismanagement. I guess that's a good reason why it's important. What is it? Basically, cash flow is really simple. It's money you have coming in versus the money you have paying out. And as long as you have more coming in than you're paying out and the treadmill keeps going, it works really good. And making sure that you manage and understand where the money's coming from, that's one of the key pieces.
And with that, would you say because you want to make sure that you have enough coming in, going out, that timing of this is of the utmost importance?
Well, it's really easy to fall behind because just like in our personal lives, we have unexpected expenses. The dog has to go to the vet or all sorts of things. So something always comes up. So if you're managing it really close to the line, you're not leaving yourself any room for any potential problems or settle things, or somebody maybe doesn't pay you right away, but you have to pay somebody else sooner. And that just puts you right offside.
So one of the things that we talk about in our personal lives all the time is the idea of living paycheck to paycheck. So we don't want businesses to effectively live paycheck to paycheck because, as everyone knows, there are unexpected things, and sometimes those unexpected things are not bad things, they're super good things. But for either scenario, whether it's a new job that you need to prepare for or extra spending you need to spend on upgrading your equipment or operating systems, having a rainy day fund is important. Do you have any maybe tips on how someone could set aside a rainy day fund and stick to it?
Well, that stick to it thing is against every part of human nature. Where I see it, and it's no different than people collect their GST and remit it quarterly or whatever, and then all of a sudden, ooh, I have a bill, so I'll just pay it, and then it always comes due. One way to do it, and I do this with my own business, is that I take a certain percentage and I take it right off to the side in a separate account that's just totally separate, because it's out of sight, out of mind. And it almost falls from the financial planning principle that they use in personal investing. Say, if you can take 10%, 20%, and that's just gone. That's like an expense. That's my rainy day expense.
No, I like that. look practical for personal and business. Now, obviously, sometimes there is a gap between receivables and your payables because not everyone pays on time, even if they say they're going to, or you got to kind of stretch a few things. So, in order to manage the cycle and surviving the gap, how do we survive the gap? How do businesses survive the gap?
Well, one of the things, I'm going to sort of ramble a little bit
Sure.
because I got about 4 different ideas going at the same time, is communication is important in everything. But sometimes you're working with a really good company and then they run into a problem and they can't pay. So having that communication, knowing where they're at, what can you do? Don't forget about it, but if you just leave it and say, well, I'm not going to worry about it till next month or whatever, the further out you go, the worse it gets. So dealing with something right away and just asking the question saying, hey, look, I was expecting your payment last week. Where's it at? Versus leaving it. That's a good way to manage that. That's really important, is that communication side, especially on the receivables. And to set expectations. And if they do pay something, you want to be the first person they pay, not the last because you haven't been in front of them. So I'm not saying being a pain. I'm just saying just let it, just make sure that they're aware that you need to get paid. That's one of the key ways of managing the gap, because that happens to everybody, or somebody misses, or they're having a cash flow issue.
And I wonder, because we've talked about this before in terms of making sure that the people you do business with have the same core values as you do. So if you do run into someone who consistently is late on payments and doesn't respect the fact that you also have payments to make, maybe that's not the person you should be doing business with. Would you say?
I would have to agree with you 100%. But when you're a new business and you're trying to get revenues and keep the doors open, keep the lights on and doing that, and you're sort of grasping for any business you can get, that's a really hard call to say, you know what, I don't want your business. But that's probably the correct call, because it's people like that that can put you out of business. And it's just knowing, it's not letting, as I said earlier, the receivable extend.
And maybe in the early stages, if you set that expectation, on a go forward, you won't continue to chase it. So it's almost like what our grandmas used to say, just nip it in the bud, like just make the call. Yeah. Now, that's the receivable side. What about the payable side in terms of, we're calling them to get the receivables in, but now we've got all these things we have to pay. How do we help manage the gap on the outflow of funds?
Well, that's a very interesting one, because you can get caught up in a couple of ways. One of the interesting ones is sometimes you'll be offered discounts to pay early. You get a 2% discount and you say, oh, geez, I'll take that. But it might actually cost you more in the long run, because by taking that, you're shorting your cash in another area. And whether you have an operating line or not, you might have to borrow from that to cover it. So you really have to look at, does it make sense to take that early discount? It may, if you're having, if you're in a good position to do it and you've got the cash, yeah, absolutely. But that would have to be my one big thing, is don't short yourself in cash, because cash is king. Being able to make your payments is really important. Not over-promising or making commitments to things that you can't do. Say, oh yeah, I'll have it to you next week, when you might not be able to. That's one of the cardinal sins, is because you set up expectations that can't be met, then you have a problem and they lose confidence in you.
Yeah, so in the same way, you don't want to continue to give leeway all the time on your receivables. People might not be as patient with you if you're not authentically communicative and truly make good relationships by setting reasonable expectations. Now, you mentioned it in your previous answers, the line of credit. That is one way that many people bridge that gap, but I'm sure you've seen it, it can also be a mismanaged tool. So tell us a little bit about your experience and or I guess overview of what the line of credit should really be there for.
Well, that's a really good question. Most people don't truly understand a line of credit. Many years ago, so last century, when I was doing some commercial banking, a person would say, I'm just using a number, say a $100,000 line of credit just for sake of, or doesn't matter. But they'd have the $100,000 line of credit, but it would be continuously drawn. And the banks didn't really mind because they like to have the loan drawn. But is it a true line of credit or is it a term loan for something? Is it your core borrowings that it's supposed to be financing? A true line of credit should revolve to zero every year. So it should at least come back to zero. So you're using it for managing your working capital, the difference between your accounts receivables and payables. If you have a line of credit and it doesn't go to zero, then there's a term portion of it, because that's going to cause you problems, because it's not allowing you to use the line for what it's designed for, which is to managing the offset in payments for receivables and payables. You may be using it to finance something that you bought, a printer or something else. But that type of thing is overlooked a little bit now in the analysis by a lot of credit people. But a true line of credit should revolve to zero. And you're probably going to see it in the next couple of years with the Schedule A banks, is because of the cost of capital, their cost of borrowing. If you either using it or you don't use it, but they're going to start looking at that and to see if it does revolve.
So don't get mad at your bankers when they tell you that you need to revolve your line of credit, because that is what it's truly there for. And if you go to the banks and say you need more, but your receivables and payables don't illustrate that you need more, again, it means that you should maybe term a portion of that out because it was used for something very different. And I'm not saying that you can't, go buy a piece of equipment here and there, but make sure you're not pulling it out of your working capital, because then it's not going to allow you to operate. So if you need to do it quick, then go get a term loan to pay that out, because what you're doing is ultimately hurting your cash position.
Yes, and that's what's going to cause you the grief. At the end of the day, the cash position, managing that is crucial.
So the good news is you don't have to do it alone. You've got accountants, bookkeepers, financial advisors, your bankers, all these wonderful people who can educate you and help you see what's going on in terms of your banking. Now, each person plays a different role, and making sure you have the right people in front of you and on your team is probably the most crucial. And we talked about this over and over in the podcasts, like get your dream team, love who you're working with, and also be able to trust them and know that they have the best knowledge out there. But how do we get there? How do we figure out who our team is and what are their roles in it? So I really want to talk about the bookkeeper role, because we all know what the accountants do more or less, and we more or less know what our bankers do, but I think the bookkeepers are the best kept secret if you can find the right style of bookkeeper. Will you help us learn a little bit more about that, Dayle?
Would love to, and I think the name explains itself, a bookkeeper. Like, that's what their job is. And what's very interesting is I call it the triumvirate. You have the accountant, you have the bookkeeper, and when I used to use the term financial advisor, that could be your commercial banker or whoever's in there. You have a combination of the three. Now, when you're a smaller business, quite often you're not talking to your accountant all the time. It's usually you're going through the year. Then at year end, you take all your stuff, you give it to your accountant, and he tells you all the bad news, all the things you didn't want to hear. So on the small market, that's where it's at. Often the bookkeeping is done internally by a partner, by somebody you know, maybe somebody else that works there, and you're just trying to keep on top of it. When you get a little bigger, that's when you making sure you have the right bookkeeper, and bookkeeping is absolutely essential. I call it the garbage in, garbage out principle, because a bookkeeper, if they do their job right, technically they're just recording the transactions. The weakness is that they can record the transactions, and the programs nowadays are just amazing. They can put together all sorts of financial statements and reporting requirements. The issue is a lot of business owners haven't been shown how to look at these financial statements. They don't know how and what to do. And I can tell you, I had this discussion with somebody the other day. In clients, for bookkeeping that I've talked to in the last 6 months, not one of them is up to date. Most of them are 3 to 6 months behind because they're so busy working in their businesses, not on their businesses. And that is absolutely scary because then they don't know where their cash flow is, or their bookkeeping's behind because they don't want to pay that little extra to have somebody to come in to make sure they're all caught up, to make sure that their receivables are being called on time, to make sure that their payables are being collected on time. They're so focused, and this is where I would have to say the nub of the problem is they're so focused on getting sales, not on managing the bottom line. And so the bookkeeper themselves can help get you the reporting, but the bookkeeper is only part of it. A good bookkeeper / accountant, I always think you should have a mentor, or a coach. We do that in sports all the time. Everybody has somebody they talk to, they trust. But at the end of the day, for finance, you should have a mentor, somebody that can say, hey, look, and that can be your banker, that can be your accountant, that can be your bookkeeper, depending on their skill sets. But you need somebody to help keep guiding you. And in some cases, the bookkeepers can do it. I'm going to use my sports analogy. I was in a presentation, and everybody was talking about being the quarterback, about looking after the overall relationship and bringing everybody in to help the client with when they're going to be sold or working on their growth strategies and everything. And somebody came to me and they said, what do you do? And I said, well, I deal with bookkeeping. And what we're the equipment managers of the business world. Because if you ask any professional athlete, in most cases, they'll tell the physiotherapists and the equipment managers are the people that keep the team going. They're behind the scenes, don't see them. Nobody talks about it. But if your chin strap isn't fixed, if the football isn't filled, if there's not enough tape around, if your locker isn't put together the way you want, and all this stuff, you can't go do your job properly. And so bookkeepers are really the equipment managers of the business world. Nobody talks about it, and they can make a big difference positively, and they can also make a big difference negatively if you don't have the right one.
So this is interesting. I'm really enjoying the sports analogies. And I never think about the equipment manager when I watch football, but they are very important. But you also were talking about golf and all the things, and I'm thinking, when I'm golfing, I don't wait till the end of my round to see how I'm doing.
Good analogy.
Yeah, right? So if I waited till the end and I said, oh, I'm 15 strokes over, let's hope that that's all I'm over. But
well, for me, that's a front nine.
Yeah. Mine's not. Yeah, mine's a little shady. I'm really boosting my confidence here. But let's say I am. I'm 15 strokes over on 9, because that's more realistic. If I looked at it at the end, how would I know how to be better during? Like, the game's over.
Right.
But if I track every hit and I know exactly where I am in real time, then I know what I need to change to get better.
Exactly. So if a person's, say, golf's at a certain number on 18 and they're behind or over, they track it. We do it automatically.
Right.
It's a competitive nature of people, but we do that, but we don't do that in business because a lot of times, because they're not keeping track of it, they don't know where they are.
So you can't make decisions going forward with any up-to-date data.
Well, and I was thinking about this on the way over, and it really hit me, and I wanted to impress upon this point. A lot of businesses do some internal reporting. It's not as strenuous as it should be, but they do some. They take their information to the accountant at year end, and then they get the good or bad news. The problem is that's a year. There's a whole lot of things that can go sideways, up, down, or across in a year. And that's like that keeping score in golf, or it's like your monthly reporting. Do you know what your margin is? I just had this discussion with a gentleman the other day. I said, you have sales and service. Do you know what your margin is? How much you're making on your sales side versus your service side? He didn't know. He went back and looked at it and said, I make twice as much on service as I do on sales. I said, exactly. He said, you're focused on sales. You could make a way more money if you just did your sales, kept your foot in there, but focused on this service. And he went, I never thought of that. The numbers have been there for years.
Yes.
They just don't know how to. And that comes back to the bookkeeper. That comes back to their advisor to say, hey, look, let's look at this a little closer. Because a lot of times the bankers don't have time to look at this. They're just looking to make sure that you're on side.
Absolutely.
They don't have the time anymore to sit down and give advice. And so that's why you have to find the right people.
It's interesting when you said about, if you focus on one area versus the other, you could make more. And a lot of the times we get distracted by the sexiness of sales, right? We're a $10 million company, we're a $20 million company. But I can attest to this as a banker. Yes, I want to see you grow. I want to see your market reach go. But I care way more about what you're keeping at the end of the day in your profitability than I do about how much you generated in revenue year over year.
Yeah.
Right? So that's so important, and making sure that you're really addressing your financials, because if you're not looking at it, how do you know what's happening? And so going back to kind of the bookkeeper's role, we know that they're there to record information, but there are bookkeepers who themselves work closer with entrepreneurs to help ask those questions and find those solutions. Tell us about how to find those special individuals who can go from just data entry to really truly helping you think deeper about what your numbers are saying about your business.
There's a few of them out there, but very few. And that's one of the reasons why I came out of retirement, because I didn't see that support being provided out there. Because there's a big difference between the bookkeeper giving the information and then waiting till the end of the year for the accountant to analyze it. Nobody's looking at that. Where's the advice coming from? The bankers don't have the time. They're being asked to do more with less. So there's a couple of places out there that are more than bookkeeping, but that's one of the reasons why I created this one company, just because it wasn't out there. It's needed, and we need more of it. So it's truly a catch-22 right now to try and find somebody. And there's so many programs out there. And this is what's nice. 10, 15 years ago, while we had technology, we didn't have the level of technology that they have, that QuickBooks or Sage or them have now, to be able to give you the financial information. That's beautiful. Now let's say your reporting is up to date and you have the financial information. What the heck does it mean? That's that next step. Who can you have that conversation with? Ideally, some bookkeepers, because they're more experienced, they can talk to you about that. They can help you talk about the receivables and payables, but there's a way more to it than that. There's the cash flow, there's the margins, there's the sales cycle. It's that trying to find somebody like that is really hard. There's not many of us out there.
And nowadays, our accountants are very inundated. I don't know if you've spoken to your accountant out there lately, business owners, but they are busy. They are very busy individuals. And wouldn't it be nice if they could do their job also easier for you if your reporting and all your documentation and everything was properly prepared for them? So not only can that additional support from a bookkeeper plus, I'm going to call them bookkeeper pluses, can help on your day-to-day side in managing your cash flow, but they can also help you save time at year end.
And money.
And money. We all like to save money, right? That's one way. In that case, right? And I don't know if you've all had the same experience, but when you go to the bank or any lender and ask for lending, they're going to want to see interim statements and your year ends. And if neither one of those are done within a reasonable period of time or up to date within a couple months, you're going to have a problem. So not only are all these things important so you understand and run your business better, so your accountant can do his job more efficiently and cost effectively, but also so when you go and have to ask someone for something, you are ready with that data and you are not going to miss an opportunity because you didn't have things done at the ground level, right? Foundationally.
Yeah, that's really important. And right now with the what I call a bit of a credit crunch on coming through the Schedule A banks and most of the banks. They're looking at the quality of your reporting and the timeliness of it. That is absolutely essential. The timeliness of it, because if you're constantly late, that's probably going to cost you money because they probably have late reporting fees. Mm-hmm. There's all these things that it just snowballs and it doesn't get any better. So trying to get on top of it, understanding what your financial statements say, understanding month to month your margin. Like I do that myself. I have my own spreadsheet and everything else. I know exactly where I am month to month. I can tell you within 2 decimal places of where it's at. I need to, because is it getting better? Is it getting worse? What's doing it? Where am I making? That's just a discussion you should be having. And the problem, and I mentioned it earlier, but I'm going to because this is where I've seen it too many times, is they focus on sales. And sales are important, but making money is more important. Knowing where you're making it and how you're making it.
I think if I were to sum up all the things I've learned from my friends in industry like yourself, Dayle, it's that sometimes, or a lot of the times, entrepreneurs forget that the foundations of their business are most important. So they're building things on top of a rocky foundation, and eventually, that's going to topple over. The Jenga blocks are going to fall, and it's going to be a mess. So taking the extra time is worth it in spades. Yes, you might have to take a couple hours away from business development or whatever, but it's going to save you money and effectively make you more in the long run. Am I right?
Yes, and it's very important when you look at the different stages of businesses. When you have the small business who's starting up, they have a different requirement. They probably just need a bookkeeper. They won't talk to their accountant until year end. So making sure that they have good information is important. The reason why is when they all of a sudden start getting bigger, if they haven't got into the habits of having good reporting or good information, that's going to bite them big time, because then they won't know, because as the numbers get larger, mistakes multiply. And so you'll see a lot of good successful companies with sales of $3 to $4 or $5 million go out of business. It's cash flow. Mm-hmm. It's not because they didn't have a good business. It's because they couldn't manage their cash flow. And so when I'm working with one right now, and my comment to him is, I said, let's structure your company to be a $10 million business, so that when you get there, we're not changing things again. Let's look at the focus. Let's get the proper reporting put in place. Let's make sure we know what the numbers are. Let's put this in place. And so they had to go back. And one of the biggest things was managing inventory, because on a lot of businesses, that can get out of hand. And that because you sink a lot of money in there and it can be sitting in the back room. So we had to talk about inventory management and just, okay, do we drop it by X number of dollars? What do we need? What can you get? And those are discussions that aren't always on the balance sheet, but they're there because it says inventory and number of turns.
I know that looking at numbers, unless they're, I made a ton of money this year numbers, isn't always exciting. But I think if you take the time to understand them, they become exciting, because they are no longer just numbers on a page that mean nothing. They mean so much. And you could look at your numbers and say, oh, wait a minute. Last year by this time, we did this much more, or our expenses in this category were this much less. And all of a sudden, you're seeing patterns, and you're, as a business owner, able to really understand what's happening, also protecting yourself. Because should something get out of hand and you didn't notice, well, what do you do then? Whether it's, an employee spending too much, or, job costings getting out of hand, is your estimator, like, what's happening? Some of these things are not just numbers things. They are really valid business topics that need to be addressed.
One way I look at this is we all talk about going to doctors and what the first thing the doctor does. They do a basic look at you. They check your heart rate. They check your blood pressure. You can go in there with your finger half off, but they're still going to check everything. But what happens is they do basically a physical checkup. They do make sure everything's okay. We have the ability to do that in businesses, but we don't. That's quite often what the banker's looking for, is they're doing that financial checkup every year. They're checking the company's heart rate. They're checking the company's blood pressure. They're checking the company's, all these different areas. That's what it is. And if you go for a year without knowing where you're at, you're setting yourself up for a lot of hurt.
I feel like the downside is more so than the upside of not of not paying attention to your financial data. You do want to take yourself out of the business because you want your business to run without you being as the center nucleus, but that doesn't mean that you completely turn a blind eye and disappear from it. Do you have any recommendations to how to find the balance of being involved and to not working as much within it?
Oh, that's a whole HR question because it's people, personalities. All the skill sets that make an entrepreneur good is because they've taken the ball and they've dragged it over the finish line and they've done everything. And then to be able to hand it off and to trust people, that's the hard one to make sure, and especially in a market when it's hard to keep people. But I think it comes back to one of the first things we talked about, making sure you have the proper people around you. Your bookkeeper, your accountant, your banker, or financial advisor, making sure you have a good support group around you. And in the process, they can help guide you as to how to take a step back. Because do you need to help take that door off of the back of a flatbed and put it into inventory? No, you don't necessarily have to do that. It might make you feel good, but that's not necessarily the best use of your time. Maybe your time should be looking at saying, do we have too many doors? Everybody goes back to what they know, and they can always do it better and faster. But if you're really, really good, you've got your people trained to do it better than you can.
And also making sure you're communicating with those people. We talked about it from your receivables and payables side, but also with those integral people who are a part of the foundational metrics of your business. So, whether it's quarterly touch points, you decide what's right for your business, but keeping an eye on things and understanding what you're actually keeping an eye on. This has been super great. I think this should be business 101 everywhere, even in personal life. So hopefully everyone learned something. Any final pieces of advice, Dayle, or a call to action?
Call to action is if you're behind in your own financial reporting, just ask yourself, what is that doing to you? Like, why are you there? What can you do to get caught up? And you'll find that once you get caught up, it'll give you a greater peace of mind because you'll know exactly what's going on. I used to make this joke, but it was when I was in the wealth management world, and people are really good at procrastinating. We do it really good. And so I used to talk to clients and I'd say to them, I said, okay, my job is to nudge you. Now I can nudge you or kick you in the ass. Which way do you want to go? But some people know they need a kick. Some people know they just need a nudge. But this is where you can use your professionals around you. That's really important. And so you need to find somebody that can help nudge you.
Well, new year, new you. So anything's possible.
And a new nudge.
And a new nudge. You can start today. You don't have to wait. And go get that financial data sorted out. I think everyone will be surprised how much that is truly beneficial once they really dive into it. So thank you so much for teaching us today about cash flow, talking us through the roles of bookkeepers and all the wonderful things. It's been a sincere pleasure, Dayle. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Zrinka.
Oh, all right, everyone. Have a great new year. And if you're heading to the gym to work off those cookies, well, great. And if you're not, consider this your nudge. Bye.